What's up everybody, my name is Dwight and welcome back to GeForce Garage. Previously, we built a budget build around the GTX 1050. In this episode, we're going to be building a mid-range build around the GTX 1070. So we wanted to center this build around the GTX 1070, and we wanted to try to hit that magical $1,000 mark. Unfortunately, we went a little over budget. We were around $1,100 this time, but we didn't want to take any half steps, and we wanted a really rounded PC. So we didn't want 8 gigs of RAM over 16, that sort of thing. We started with the ASRock Killer SLI. This is a Z270 board, which is black and white in design. To match that, we have our Corsair LPX Vengeance RAM, which is white. We have M.2 SanDisk X400 256 gig. It's going to give us a lot more performance. Not a whole lot of storage, but we can always upgrade that later on. And a 7600K Intel i5. Now, we were kind of hoping to maybe sneak a Ryzen chip in there, but the price to performance for mid-range, it just wasn't working out. We got this one for like 220 bucks, and the Ryzen equivalent would have been closer to 300. To power all of it, we have an EVGA 500 watt, and thankfully the 1070 is only 150 watts, so it's gonna be able to power it just fine. And to house all of our PC parts, we have an NZXT S340. All right, so we have all of our parts laid out, and it's time to start building our PC. And just to show how easy it is to build, I brought along my friend Joe. Joe, if you wanna come out here. He's gonna help me build the PC today. So let's get started. All right, so it was a pretty painless build. Unlike our budget build, this case is a lot bigger, so I had a lot more room to work in. Cable management is actually really good in this case. It's one reason why I chose it. I really like the bar that's here in the middle. It helps cover some of the wires. There's also plenty of room down below for all the cables that you don't use. Since we don't have a modular power supply, we have a lot of extra cables because we don't have a hard drive or CD drive or any of that. Another cool thing about the motherboard that I noticed, it actually has 2 spots for an M.2 drive, so you can have 2 running, I assume, at the same time. It also has RGB on the bottom that from the manual states that I can program it later on. But first, I think we need to throw an operating system on it and see how well it performs. Just like with our GTX 1050 video, I started off with 3D Mark's recommended test Time Spy. But unlike the last test, this time it wasn't just a slideshow, and in fact it performed pretty well, scoring a 5726. Which puts it better than 72% of the current results and just shy of that 4K gaming PC benchmark. This time all my tests will be showing 1080p and 1440p numbers, and we're only going to hit 4 of the big games out there. Starting with the recently launched Mass Effect Andromeda, which ran pretty well. With everything on Ultra, it would hit high 90s and break 100 quite often. Without changing any of the settings on 1440p, it also stayed in the 90s, but would dip more often into the high 70s during firefights. With The Witcher 3 on high settings, it pulled around mid-80s at 1080p, and with the same high settings would stay in the mid-60s at 1440p. Battlefield 1 did just as great at 1080p on Ultra settings, consistently breaking those triple digits and staying there. On 1440p, still on Ultra, it would stay in the mid-70s, occasionally dipping into the 60s if there was a lot of fire and explosions around you. Now, I had a good amount of people ask me to test these out in GTA 5, and this PC crushed it at 1080p. With everything turned up and driving it around would max out my refresh rate at 144 FPS, and would only dip down if I was racing through the city at high speeds. At 1440p, still on max settings, it would hang around 110 while racing around and come up to about 125 when going slower. So it did great. It killed every game at 1080p at ultra settings, and it's a great gateway into 1440p gaming as well. A couple of issues that I came across while putting on an operating system and stuff like that. You do need to update the BIOS for this particular motherboard to boot from the M.2. I didn't know that at first and I wasn't getting a signal. So if you're doing this yourself, make sure to update your BIOS first, and then you can put in the M.2 and install your operating system. Another thing is if we're gonna add any extra hard drives to this or wanna do overclocking or both, it would be wise to get a higher wattage power supply, like a 600 or 650. That way you have that headroom to work with, so you're not struggling with an underpowered PC. Other than that, I'd like to thank Joe very much for helping me out. It was much easier with him. He had smaller hands than I did, so he was able to plug in stuff that I couldn't. If you like these types of videos, you can leave a like, maybe leave a comment down below. If you're new to the channel and you like what you saw, you can always consider subscribing down below to be informed. The only thing left for me to do is throw on this GeForce Garage badge, and I'll see you guys for the next one.